current CTO of Absa. He's also recently taken over the infrastructure role across the whole of Barclays Africa. Today, he's going to share with us a status on how things have gone, how things are going, some of the lessons learned. So again, please put your hands together for Peter Rix.
Thank you, Brett. Hello again. I think the idea here is for us to share between all of us what's happening in our different areas. And it's quite a difficult one, so particularly from my world, is that we've tried to federate this. We've tried to make sure that our wealth business can run differently to our digital business, which can run differently to our retail business, and try to get them underpinned by the same thing. So to try to pull it together and say, these are the good things that are happening, or these are the challenges, is quite a feat. But we are getting a good collaboration running between everybody, and that's a great outcome for us. To kick off, I think we're living in a really interesting time in Barclays Africa, or Absa, in that we've hit our day one. Our day one was the 1st of June, which is the separation that happens between Barclays and, let's call it Absa or Barclays Africa. And in that itself comes with a great opportunity. Nothing changes in our strategy. All we see is the opportunity to move at a faster rate and to use the opportunity to do things differently. So we really, really think that we have a once-in-a-lifetime capability to actually move to the new ways of operating. And if we don't take it, it's a mistake on our side. And it's a really, really key part of our strategy overall. All right, so how many of you guys are dealing with viruses right now? My guys and myself were up all last night. I actually eventually had to go to bed because I knew I had to be here, but we've got guys running and dealing these virus capabilities everywhere. First thing I put on here, this is just a general update, but my friend Jason over there at the last Devops conference spoke about security, DevSecOps, and it's key in what we're doing. We're having to think about how we pull this whole component together, and we are very, very young in this process. There is nothing strong behind what we're doing, and we understand the importance of bringing the security components into what we're doing. And actually at the break, I was talking with some of my mates from Prague, and they're basically saying, struggling to get security people all over, and that's what we've got to deal with. So, I think we should not underestimate what that means and where we're going, and that's for all of us, and as an industry, how we've got to work together on that. We are starting to build this into our pipelines. I know some of the teams are using stuff like OWASP, ZAP, which are really calling REST APIs all the time as part of their automatic builds, and they are testing different penetration capabilities, etc., in what we're doing. And we believe this is a fundamental part of what we've got to take forward in the DevSecOps journey to be successful. The other one which we're starting to work on is a little bit on the artificial intelligence side of things, and whatever that means, but we're really looking at ops. Ops is very, very focused on robotics and bots and the operationalization components of this. So underpinning that, we're starting to see, well, how can we use bots to be able to drive those things that we don't typically want to do ourselves, from the really mundane work to some of the intelligence and decisioning-making processes. And we have a product we're starting to build now, PDLC. I think Kevin, wherever you are, maybe talking about it later. But it is really for us to say, take all our tools. In today's world, when we want to set up our whole Atlassian suite and get our Bitbuckets running and everything else, it takes us 2 weeks or something just to get all those environments set up. And what the guys are doing is push of a button, you pull in some forms, and it builds the whole lot for you. It's not productionalized yet, but we're really sitting in that situation where we think the automation of this is very, very key to, again, take admin and pain away from our engineers so they can really do the cool engineering side of things. So those are the two things that weren't really heavily on our radar last time we spoke that we're working on. And then the stuff that we did talk about last time when we were here was along the lines of the tooling, the practice of mastery, metrics, testing, etc. And I mean, we are all doing different things and all using different components, but I know in my teams, I'm pushing and saying at least start with the 3 basic practices. And by the end of the year, there should be no one in my team that's not doing this when they're dealing this capability, which is version control. Use something like a Bitbucket or a derivative of that, or whatever makes sense if you're tied into the mainframe. It sounds like such an obvious thing, but how many people are not doing it just blows my mind. So driving along that line, the style guides are important when we start doing artificial intelligence, when we start doing the security components, so that the software can check the software, it predicts what's going on and how it's going to be done. And then again, the basics of code review. You'd expect us to all be doing that, and it's one of those things I'm really struggling actually to get people to do it. And it's part of that mastery capability. One of the most exciting things I have on my radar is this engineering network. It's something that we took live at the end of last year, and it gives our developers essentially total freedom. We have about 200 to 250 developers that are running on that engineering network. It is separated from the production networks. We haven't quite got it 100% right yet. It's part of a whole set of deliverables. But the idea is when you're in that engineering network, it's impossible to get onto the bank's production network. Only way you go through that is like VDI or something along those lines. And when you're in that network, you can do whatever you want. And it's quite interesting. People bring their own devices, they plug them in, and some of the bad stuff that they're doing at home ends up on that engineering network. We pick it up and we tell them to shut it down. But we're not punishing the guys for that. We're saying just be aware. It's not culture we tolerate or whatever it may be, but we're giving you freedom to innovate and to do DevOps stuff, and this is key to where we land. And we guess over the next year, there's going to be massive adoption in there because of the level of freedom that lives inside that engineering network. Key to where we are. And ultimately, the pipelines that we build, if you're going to use that engineering network, you've got to have a pipeline that's running, which is a little bit in terms of the tooling and things like that. That pipeline takes it to a particular point, goes through all the security tests, everything else, and then software picks it up and takes it out of the engineering network and puts it into the production network to go through its final sets of tests. So it's a very, very strategic and important piece of our deliverable going forwards. Metrics, I mean, there's so many different components of metrics, but what we're really finding is to try to drive some of the culture, which is a strange thing to do, is we're actually trying to measure some of the, we're trying to drive some of the inputs of metrics, which is not what you normally look at, but we're trying to say, have you got pipelines running? Have you got triads of product owners and a tech lead and a scrum master? And we're trying to drive that level of metrics through where we are. And then the output of that is starting to drive the outcomes of the velocity, the speed and the quality of what we're trying to bring through. And it's quite difficult to measure the outputs. But we are trying to say by driving the inputs, it's going to start creating certain behaviors, which is giving us our outputs, and we're starting to see that come through. I think one of our big challenges is testing and doing test-driven development. I'm of the view that you can't really do DevOps properly until you're doing test-driven development. And to try to get people into that mindset is very, very difficult. So we're getting people to go down and put pipelines together and all of that, but only the really mature teams that we have, which is not that many, are going through the test-driven capability and building everything from the beginning. And we're starting to see some successes there, particularly in the areas that are born in the cloud. I think those people are really thinking in the right new way of working, and they're able to do it. They also don't have the legacy, they don't have the stuff to catch up from the past, which is quite difficult. But we have a number of these test-driven development areas, and those are the areas that are able to move fast, but just not nearly enough. And then I'm not going to go through the tools, but it's just the usual tools that we're dealing and trying to get everybody to be quite consistent on it, but allow them a little bit of freedom to try other things at the same time. Okay, I think a large portion of us have gone through, and we've demonstrated it in the past between all of us, the different infrastructures as a service. One of the things that we've done with inside Absa is I've taken on the infrastructure component because I think we need to get infrastructure at scale. We need to get it running in this particular way. And we've got ready-to-use offerings that are in that infrastructure as a service, and they're in our engineering network as an example. So we have a Linux build that is fortified in the appropriate way. We're still having struggle with access, so we build you this beautiful Linux box very, very quickly, and then to try to get access onto it in the right way is a bit of a nightmare, so we're busy working on that at the moment. But the aim is this year is to get to a point where we take that out of the worry that we have, and then we're aiming to get this ability to build that not only in the cloud, because it's all built in the cloud at the moment, but to build it on our hyper-converged capabilities and on our verts, so that we can spin them inside and outside the bank and what we do and how we do it. Also to bring in the likes of SQL and all the Windows capabilities, all our usual capabilities. And what we are doing is we're having a look at what's coming from the items that are living in the UK, in PLC, and we're saying, well, we've got to move that all back to South Africa. Where do we prioritize the automation of it? Because imagine moving thousands of servers into South Africa from the UK. It's a very, very big task. We don't want to do it in the old way. It's a beautiful opportunity for us to say 80-20 rule. Most people are using Linux or whatever it may be. We'll build it up in the Linux way and we'll bring it back. So again, that unique capability. Brett, you spoke about product teams, and really it's key. We see the power of the teams that are doing this right, but there's just not enough. You know, the product teams as they are today are just the developers typically sitting together, and when we get the business in there, we get the security guys in there, we get the compliance guys in there, we get this right. So there's probably only, 30 teams that are doing it in the right way, I think, today, out of the hundreds of teams that we've got running, and we're trying to push that. And what we're really struggling with is, if I want to put a Linux guy into that team, I don't have enough Linux guys. You know, so they're trying to automate the stuff that I'm just spoken about, and now I want them to go work in Brett's digital team, and I can't allocate them in because they're doing that. But once we've got that automation done, they'll be able to go and live in Brett's team and work with them there as well. I've got many words of automation, and I guess that's the key driver of Devops. This particular line of automation is our pipelines. I covered it a little bit. Brett, you covered design thinking, actually. And you know, some of the stuff that we're trying to do is to get in a really amazing experience. Our head of design is building good look and feels, and he's making them into libraries that we are able to pull in. So we're not quite there yet, but the idea is you need to be able to use a particular design, call a library, part of the DevOps process, you pull in those look and feels, and off you go. And then obviously the core thinking of it is not only about graphics and the way that thing looks, but it's about the understanding of empathizing the user, and we're trying to get that. So we've grown our design team. I think it's close to 50 or 60 people now, because we're seeing the value of this and how we remove waste out of the process, and how we get a really good streamlined process in getting stuff done. Resilience, again, I think we're really understanding, and we'll touch a little bit on the PaaS stuff, but to be able to bring the platforms as a service, the ability to spin up Docker containers, and everything that's coming through that, and to be able to kill an instance and move on. We're busy working on that. We don't really have anything that is super industrialized yet. On my next slide, I think it is, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then cost efficiencies. You know, we're trading this balance of old legacy physicals that we've built and bought, and they're on our balance sheet, and how do we get rid of that and move into all the hyper-converged and cloud capabilities, because that's giving us the velocity, and there's a bit of a resistance there in the way that we do. But we are starting to see, particularly in the areas where there's streamlined, more and more capacity becoming available. So as we're automating, it was really hard up front, but in those areas that are doing it well, more and more capacity is starting to come available, because they're not doing the 2 days to move stuff from one environment to the other. It's 2 seconds or 2 minutes to move stuff between the environments. So when we believe we've got scale there, we're going to see some massive beneficial capabilities coming through. Okay, I spoke about platform as a service, and we're doing a lot of work on this. We have 2 different platforms that are running at the moment. We have a queue of people waiting to go into this. They've done their dev and test. Right now we're going through the penetration tests and making sure that we're comfortable with it. Our CRB business, I think, have just been through their penetration test. They finished last week. The rest of the organization's doing their penetration tests, and it should be finished in the next week or 2. We'll refine based on whatever outcomes and security holes we see there, and we believe that the ability to run these containers and to take them forward will be a game changer for the way that we're operating. And as I say, there's a queue of people waiting to go into that environment. So it's really, really good. It's also good to see the legacy capability that's living on that. It's one of our big challenges, but those people who have got the right mindset are putting some of their legacy on those containers, and it's working quite well. So it's a nice outcome. I spoke a little bit about the automation and the provisioning capability. We're using a combination of some of the cloud providers and their provisioning, as well as our own that we've been building. There's some of the people in this room that are building our provisioning capability, and that is quite difficult, actually. To provision a box, a Linux box, is one thing. To monitor whether it should still be running, whether it's being effective, how much it costs, how do we charge out, is it logging and monitoring, all the other bits and pieces is a lot of work. So I think we underestimated the effort that goes into the operations of this stuff and getting it right. And it's about this DevOps again, right? Everybody's focusing on the dev side and not enough on the ops side. Reason why we can't get infrastructure to scale is we don't focus enough on the ops component. And we've got to do that to be successful. We're having a great experience on archiving. We have the guys in Prague that have built a capability of archiving very, very efficiently and almost real time, that you can pull the information back on the likes of SQL. We have in our data world, where they are working with the Prague guys. They are taking all our big data and all our data that's been sitting on storage that's very, very expensive, and they are slowly archiving that directly into the cloud, and that's encrypted, and that's making a big difference. And we're busy building a front end at the moment that will allow us to manually go and say, you want to archive this piece of data, you can do it. And then obviously from a DevOps perspective, an API that allows people to do it. So that's under development at the moment, which then says, call this thing, you archive that data, and you can get it back when you need. And I spoke up front to say that we're running quite federated at the moment, and we're finding it's better that way. We're not dictating, we're not forcing people to what is actually happening, but we're inefficient in that we're duplicating in many cases. So these informal networks and trying to get people to meet on a regular basis, run demo days, show what you've done, get excitement, stop other people from duplicating, is one of the success stories that we've had, like a mixture of it. Where it is happening, very, very successful. People are saying, I like what you've done. 10 minutes later, they're almost doing the same thing. And others like, that's not me. I want to do it slightly different. I don't like the tech you built it on. And they're duplicating where it goes. So, I think it's a core thing for us to build these informal networks. And we're doing everything we can to try and encourage that between the different teams with the appropriate demo days and collaboration tools. I spoke about one of the things that we underestimated, and we've been pretty successful moving into some of the cloud providers. We don't have huge amounts of stuff running in the cloud because we've been working through the production capabilities and what we're allowed to do, not allowed to do. We have been doing quite a lot of stuff on dev and test, but the operationalization of the cloud was one of the things that we definitely underestimated. We were up and running in the cloud pretty quickly, but to be able to run it like you run a bank, and to operate the way that you run a bank with all the security components and knowing exactly what's going on is actually quite a lot of work. And we're hoping to have most of that stuff out of the way in the near future, but we're seeing the value of being able to experiment and move very, very quickly and to put particular workloads into the cloud. Again, those things that are born in the cloud are just incredible. The guys that started from the beginning in the cloud and they're working, the ability for them to put stuff into production on essentially a daily basis. We don't allow them to do it on a daily basis, but they have that capability. It is a really, really nice position for us to land. I also alluded to skills, and I think this is why I'm so pro driving this behavior and bringing everybody together, is we cannot get enough skill in this. We have lots and lots of people, but they aren't strong enough yet on engineering, and how do we drive everything as code, and how do we change the way that we bring up the automation components. And we're really hunting everywhere for good talent in the way it works. And I know, speaking to everybody else, Jason and Yusuf and even some of the technical guys that I speak to that are leading teams from all across the different banks, struggling to find the right type of skill to be able to do this. And we've started setting up environments all over South Africa. There's a big hub now in Cape Town. We're stealing our guys from Prague to come and work in that as well, because we want to bring those type of skills in. But I think it's up to all of us here to invest in skill, We're doing a lot of work. I know together we're doing a lot of work in growing grads and people out of the different areas to build the skill, because we believe that we want to do this in South Africa. It's the collaboration thing you spoke about. Put the guys together, and the efficiencies are just so much higher when they're actually working together and not sending things via email. And then the legacy components. I think doing one legacy point is actually relatively easy. But when you look at the ecosystem of the whole bank and everything that you've got to worry about, we're struggling with that because everybody's moving at different pieces or different paces. And how do we get, if we could just wave a magic wand and say legacy, everybody works at the same pace, we'd have a very, very different game. But we're having some things that people said were impossible to do in these new ways, and we're proving them wrong. Stuff that people said has to happen on the mainframe. The guys are doing it on the mainframe or off the mainframe and doing a really, really good job. I was speaking to some of the friends I have in some of the other banks, and they got their guys going into the mainframe, to Devops inside there. That doesn't mean moving it off the mainframe in many cases, but just doing the processes in a different way and operating better. And I think it is a key challenge. So our three main challenges is operationalizing the cloud at the moment, getting our skills and getting enough skill, and then dealing some of the legacy and how do we take it through. And I'm ignoring that security one that I alluded to right up front. And then really you have to end on the people side of things, but the drive to do collaboration and creating those workspaces is important. I think from the time we started our first collab, I presented it here. We're now on our fourth stage in our collab. There is such a big demand. I mean, I'm trying to do the fourth stage, and there's 400 people that are wanting to go into the next stage. And I'm having to push back and say, no, we can only get another 100 into the new phase. So this desire for the collaboration and freedom spaces, if you call it, is very, very high. And as a result, we're getting a lot of these shadow collabs that are going, and we're only encouraging them because it's a key to bringing everything together. And it's really, really great to walk around and see how people are trying to create their own collaboration zones, if you want to call it, out of nothing. And it's a behavior that we're pushing and trying to drive to get that right. I mean, I've taken over infrastructure, but I think it's not an infrastructure issue. It's an issue everywhere. I spoke about skill and how do we get skill running. And what we've actually done is we've created a library. We call it hashtag not the library, but it's a learning zone, a very funky learning zone in one of our collab zones. And we're going to test it out and see if we can get it to work. But the idea is everything is geared in there. You walk in there, there's tablets everywhere. You can go to your compliance training if you want, but that's not really the core aim of it. The aim is to go in there and say, I want to be an AWS guy. Now this is what I've got to do in AWS. Or I want to be a stack engineer. Here's what I've got to do to be a stack engineer. Or I want to do a security course. Here's what we've got to do. And we've been working with all the online vendors, all the online books, to say how do we bring that capability together so that we can create a culture of learning. And when people are coming into the organization, the idea here, and we haven't got it right yet because we've only just launched this, but the idea is when people come into the organization, this is how you use our Devops tools. This is how you use our cloud tools. This is how you use our API tools. These are the type of things that we are hunting for to be successful in the way that we operate. And a big investment in this learning zone. And whether you do it in the same way or somewhere else, if you can get that running across all the different environments, I think it's power for us. We're also looking at alternative training capability. I know some of my corporate colleagues and investment banking colleagues are working at the moment doing virtual reality training, essentially, where you work walking around in rooms and stuff. So you make it really cool, whether it's compliance training or something else, to try to teach people, and we're experimenting with that at the moment. And we're also trying to look and say, well, how do we scale that across the organization, particularly into the remote areas, because we're probably going to do a lot of that on mobile. And we've got to get the right type of bandwidth and get everything operating. But we're looking at many different ways to educate and to grow. And I think, we really, if there's one taking that we're trying to drive is how do we grow skill. And then culture, Brett spoke a lot around culture. And, we believe it is the total component of success here. And what we did used to try to do was go and say, well, this is how Google does it. This is how AWS does it, and we started to change that. Well, actually, our value proposition is not that. You know, it's a very different value proposition. We're trying to focus on what it means and then to say, how do we change the culture so that we have our own Absa or Barclays Africa culture that follows good engineering practices. But it's not one of those things. People that we've hired, I mean, there's a number of people that we've hired from AWS or LinkedIn or Google or wherever else that come to us for a particular reason. And what is that reason? And we're trying to say, well, let's focus on that, because those are the type of people we're trying to bring in. And our current staff love that anyway, so let's build that up as a cultural component. And it is an important part of our agenda. And it's going to end on this, right? There's a lot of ordinary people, if you want to call it that. And I've been amazed by some of the staff that we have had that really start going, and they actually become quite extraordinary. You almost write them off. And then they come in and you give them this freedom to do what they need to do and how to do it, and they blow you away. You know, they do things that you don't expect. And I think I'm going to end on that, because that's a big piece of the culture that we want to drive, is how do we make everybody extraordinary in the way that they do and take things forward. Okay. I don't know, are we doing questions or are we just going to move on?
I'm Gavin from Standard Bank. Just a question. So you talked about skills and getting new people into the organization. Just a question. So what do you think of getting, like, skilling the guys in the organization for DevOps and so forth?
Very, very important in what we're doing. And that's why we have that hashtag, not the library, as an example, is to say, how do we invest in getting people along that? One of the best ways actually is for peer pressure and letting the guys have the opportunity to drive it. But, I mean, I'm sure Standard Bank is very similar. From when I used to be there, it was like 5,000 or 6,000 people in total from a technology perspective. We cannot underestimate that skill and what we can do with that skill. And we're very, very happy with that skill. It's just they've got to do things in a different way. So we want to invest in that. We've launched this. People can go into that area as they need. We really got to get that into a critical mass component to be able to do it, because 6,000 people or 5,000 people doing things in the right way will be in a different league to where we are today. So it's very, very important. We're not going to find, I mean, how many technologists are there in South Africa? You know, most of them actually work for banks or financial institutions. If we've got 5,000 people, Standard Bank's got 5,000 people, RMB and FNB, how many you got, Jason? Yeah, so you know, there are tens of thousands of technologists living in this little environment. The budget that's allocated is in the multiple billions, you know, so it's probably like 20 billion between the financial institutions. And I think, you know, we have to invest there. That's where we're critical masses. We've got to take the people we have on the journey.
The operations and HR side actually started to evolve with the Agile movement to cater for getting those type of skills.
It's a very, very good question, actually. And we hit our heads quite heavily. We got the technical world moving very quickly. And it wasn't long before we couldn't go any further, because we didn't have the business driving it. We didn't have HR, compliance, legal. All our bottlenecks ended up outside. And it became a question of what do we do? And actually our biggest transformational component that's happened, and I think, you know, Brenda in Standard Bank's done something similar, but our chief exec now runs stand-ups every single day with his execs, and it's power. It's in an open area. There's 50 or 60 people standing there. You actually don't want to be asked a question. Piers, I think you've been there. But, you know, when your chief exec is now running, excuse me, is running a board, and the execs are having to answer, and he doesn't tolerate this is not me, that's not me, it starts to change the culture. And all of a sudden, HR is jumping, legal is jumping, everyone that was deemed as a but person is jumping. And then we've taken some core people, Nicole over here, and I don't know where James is he here? You know, that we've taken them out of their day jobs to go work with a small team that really hunts down and says, how do we remove all the things that are in the way? And it's one of those things that we deem is going to make a massive difference. The transformational component from, 6 months ago to today, since the chief exec actually started running this way, is massive, because they followed the leader.
How are you handling the infrastructure as code in automation in the infrastructure space?
Very difficult. You know, Hemant have taken him out of his day job essentially, and his job is to drive infrastructure scaling and to build provisioning capability and say, well, how do we scale into the likes of an AWS or onto our hyper-converged capabilities? And, we're getting there. It won't be long before we have the ability to scale massively. But it is a question of what gets used with that afterwards as well, and how do we get onto it. So there is a lot of investment that is going on. Hemant basically has unlimited headcount, so Hemant, just go get what you need to do to make sure you get this right. But it is the right type of people. This is very, very difficult to get the infrastructure to scale. I think anybody that is building it will understand how complicated it is. It's not as simple as writing a couple of scripts. And I think there are some of the discussions later on this afternoon, which is along those lines, is what are the guys doing to get that appropriate scale?
Hi, I'm Noki from Absa. I want to know, is there collaboration between ourselves and tertiary institutions in terms of collaborating the new ways of working so that we eliminate the old skills and we start empowering our grads with the new ways of working?
I mean, it's a mixture, but the idea is absolutely yes, if we can get that right. I mean, it's one of the things that Yosef will talk about it. The meeting that I said up front earlier is that, when we get together, we have some of the academics that are joining us and saying, well, how do we work together to take this forward? There are many, many different initiatives that each one of us are working on. Some of us are sharing those between the banks and saying, this is what we're doing to invest in particular individuals. In fact, I was introduced to some of the guys. Here we go. Right here. They don't work for us, but they're part of those initiatives that we're using to grow. Kids that code and all the other areas to bring that up. And we're feeding information into the guys. There are some of the academics here, I saw them earlier, and they're taking from us to get the right type of outcome. But Yosef is driving that on our behalf, and I'll let him talk about it just now.